Swinburne University of Technology.
Start to think about, well, how have I formed my views? Because I talked about art and science in the blurb around this presentation, and for me it has been a combination of art and science. It's certainly drawing on the best of theory, but always thinking about the context in which we're applying it. And this is where I think the relationship between external people who come in to work with organisations and internal practitioners is critically important. And I've just been talking to the folk from Bendigo Bank, and again we've got this notion of external and internal and the partnering, because certainly people inside organisations are experts on many things, but they certainly know the culture and they know what the culture can tolerate in terms of how much shift, how quickly, and how should we actually position that shift. So what I'd like to do, just again by way of setting this up, is to start to talk about the term transforming. And when you're talking about transforming culture, you're actually talking about transformational leadership. And having worked in a number of organisations, there's some many and varied ways that organisations explain or think about transformation. So I wanted to draw it back to something that I think sits at the very heart of transformational or cultural transformation, and it's the work of Bassanavoglio. Now some of you will have seen this framework. It sits well with me, and there are other frameworks you could draw from, but the work of Bassanavoglio, I like it because it talks about what transformational leadership looks like, and it talks about what it doesn't look like. So if you look at those boxes ascending, what you'll see there is transformational leadership is not about laissez-faire leadership. It's not about management by exception, passive or active. It's not about contingent reward, which is based on exchange theory, which is if you do this, then I'll give you this. And these are all important leadership methodologies, but transformational leadership is a little different in my mind. And what Bassanavoglio talk about is that transformational leaders are leaders who see people as individuals and see organisations as individuals. They're able to see the unique context and the uniqueness of the individual. They also talk about transformational leaders as being challenging leaders, leaders that really stretch people and engage with people to help them to be more than they could be. They also talk about being inspiring. Now, I don't know about you, but I've worked in organisations for 30 years and I find it hard to be inspiring sometimes. And this is the work of transformation. How do we find our own inspiration, and how do we find methods and ways to bring that to the communities of practice? And finally, Bassanavoglio talked about idealised influence, which I think is really perhaps the most challenging part of being a transformational leader. And when you look at the descriptions, things like living the values in a very personal and profound way, recognising people, celebrating success, remaining energised, being ethical, role modelling the change before it happens. So providing people with the confidence and a physical template, which is what a role model is, on how to actually lead going forward. So we find this is a particularly useful model when we're starting to think about creating transformational change, because you can see that it really is the essence of the human spirit. It really is, how do we draw that up, given that we start work early, we're often doing jobs that are repetitive, and we're often working with teams that are under-resourced or potentially even are quite depleted. So how do we find that within ourselves? So this is what I'd like to talk about very briefly.
This has been a Swinburne production.